Hello friends, this is MagicNinja for DeucesCracked.com in the new series Crossfire that we've got going. And I guess I've just sat down at a couple tables here, two 4 tables on stars, and haven't really had any hands come up as of yet. I think if you look on the HUD, we've got about 10 hands on each table so far, so we're pretty much just starting with no reads whatsoever at this point. And here I raised in the cutoff. She's alright. The only thing I've noticed in the first 5 hands is that he's limped a bit. He donks the flop and then donks the turn. I think, that's probably... He could have a fairly wide range there. Like anything from Jack 10-9 to, Ace King Queen 8. I actually don't mind his play there. It seems pretty reasonable. So that's just a good note to make, actually, that he played the hand like that. If we look at it straight off the bat, we've got a fairly interesting spot here for him. I actually play his hand exactly the same with a pretty reasonable frequency. I think that's a good way to play that sort of hand. If you look at what's going to happen here, like we open 12, he calls. I think his call here is basically compulsory. He's getting such a big overlay from the pot, and he has a pretty strong hand. I mean, and my range is going to be fairly wide from this position, maybe 40% or something, 45%. On this board texture though, like check calling, like I'm going to check back this flop with a reasonable frequency with a hand like Jack 10-9, that sort of thing. Any sort of combo-ish hands, Ace Jack 10 or something. So he gets value versus those hands that he wouldn't normally, and he also just, prevents me taking the lead of the hand and then checking back the turn. I think that's one of the major reasons donking can be fairly effective in these kind of situations, is because they I mean, you just want to take control of the hand so that when the turn comes, as it does in this scenario, if you imagine if he had check called the flop and I had a hand like 6-7 of spades, right? Now I would probably check back the turn. So he got to he just kind of has control of the hand. I guess I'm kind of rambling on that point a bit, but I guess that's one of the main advantages of donking with this kind of hand. And then I call again. I think I've got enough equity versus his range of hands here. With the Queen 10. If I didn't have the Queen 10, I would just fold here, I think. I can't see it playing out too well, typically. Yeah, and then on the river, he's not really getting value from anything, and he can easily be beat. So he just checks and gives up. So, all in all, I think both our play in this hand is completely standard. But just something to look out for this player was that he made this kind of play, which, I wouldn't have expected that from someone that in the first 5 hands was limping on the button frequently, So a good kind of hand to take notice of. I'm just gonna... I don't really have a color for him yet. Anyway, as for the players at the table, we've got Broseph at the table. He's been featured in a couple of I think in pre-gaming, a couple of pre-gaming episodes. So if you haven't seen those, maybe check those out. He seems to be a pretty solid player. He doesn't really tend to mess around with me too much, but if I get out of line, he's gonna re-raise me with good hands. Or like, not good hands, but good enough. This hand, I'm getting a really good overlay from the pot. I'm not gonna call here. I know, I think Ivy would call that one. I don't think calling there would be utterly terrible, just based on the pot odds, but you're not really gonna have any good situations post-flop. And if you look here, I guess I was mentioning as for the players at the table that I'm familiar with, I assume Juanita is some kind of multi-tabling regular. He's playing the ante-table, he's playing the other tables that are running right now, all of them. I don't have any real stats on him at this point. You know, we've got 23 hands, but we'll probably get a fairly good read of him pretty quickly. Mr. Hold'em guy, I'm just going to assume is, you know, kind of weak player. Same with GYR1, just based on their stack sizes. And Soho Kid, I've seen his username before, but he's not one of these mass multi-tabling regulars. So at the 2-4 on stars, so I you know, we'll kind of proceed with a bit more caution against him and just try to get a read pretty quickly. I'm also unfamiliar with this guy Hans Gussen, Omsk, probably somewhere in Scandinavia, I'm sure. The name kind of implies that as well. He just rebought, auto top up, so you know we'll assume he's okay for now. Anyway, here on the right table, I've just opened with this hand on the cutoff, and I think that's. Oh, sorry, I wasn't the cutoff. I was one off the cutoff, and so this open was probably a little loose, to be honest. One off the cutoff. I don't think I'd typically open that. Sometimes I would, but ace big big small without a suited ace. It's just not that great a hand. It plays pretty well late position when all you really need is a big pair. So those kind of hands where a lot of the time you're just going to flop something like Queen 7-4, you know, that's going to be a good flop, heads up, but multi-way not so much. So I'd typically fold that hand in that spot. I just didn't notice, I guess. Once Jaya check raises me, I think it's pretty clear fold here. I mean, he's either going to have ace-x of diamonds, kings, or, you know, it doesn't really look like he's bluffing here very frequently when he pots. I think when people check pot in that spot, they basically, unless you've got a really good read on the player, like, I know people like Lucky Gump or like Zygmunt, like, will check pot as a bluff. But in general, I think, like, when someone check pots, you just never have folding equity. He or she's alright, limped again. Kind of an interesting strategy, I guess. I'd like to see what kind of classes of hands he's limping with. Like, is it something like 7, 8, 9, Jack, Rainbow? Or is it more like, you know, pocket jacks, Jack, 6, 2 or something, you know? He seems to be playing very loose so far, so I'm assuming it's more like Jack, 6, 2 is what he's limping. He just wants to play more hands and get in cheaply. Juanita isolated him. I'd like to see what he has at this point, because as I mentioned earlier, we don't really have a great read on how Juanita plays. At this point, we're just going to go with a general, like, assume he plays fairly tag, standard poker. But, you know, if he doesn't, we'd really like to find out straight away. And also just find out, you know, when you say someone's like a generic multi-tabling regular, most of these people kind of can play fairly well, but they do differ pretty, like, substantially in their sort of idiosyncrasies, or even just stuff like how flat their pre-flop statistics are. For example, like Juanita, you know, he might be really tight in EP and really loose on the button. That's going to totally change how we play against him, as opposed to if he's just kind of 35% in every position, you know. Here with the jacks, I think on the cutoff, you know, opening jacks here is just standard. This would be a good board to c-bet 3-way, I think. I'm actually kind of tempted to c-bet at 4-way. Just, I think I have a lot of folding equity against most hands, but I don't think I have enough against 3 players, especially when, you know, I'm not automatically going to lose the hand if I check. You know, it could get checked to me on the turn, on a deuce or something, and then I'll probably bet. If someone bets here, obviously I've just got to fold. Like, there's nothing I can do. So even though I'm just kind of sitting here being prepared to fold, I think it's important to kind of, like, what's going through my head here when someone like I'm actually trying to work out specifically what hands people have as they begin the hand. So, like, when I said this might be a good board to c-bet, I think Soho Kid, when he calls on the buttons, got a hand like, he can easily have like queens or 4, 5, 6, 8 maybe, or like ace 4, 5, 6 with a suit, that kind of thing, like kind of speculative hands that don't re-raise. If we had a better read about how he re-raised the button, that would help us a lot. Like if we thought, okay, he always re-raises with ace queen 10, that would really inform our read, but we don't really have that yet. Uh, Broseph, he's probably got a hand like ace big big, small with a suited ace, or just like ace 4, 5, 6 with a suited ace. Maybe like queen queen 10, that kind of hand. Any pair of kings. This is just pre-flop, by the way. Uh, I guess what I'm saying is, even though like there's not that much information I can glean, like people have fairly wide ranges. He's playing 30% of hands, Uh, but even just going through the process of thinking specifically, like, what hands does he specifically have pre-flop, you can then decide, like, should I be bluffing this board texture into 3 people? Because, like, you're basically just trying to work out what's the frequency that someone has a king here. I guess the only non-king hand someone's going to really continue with is, like, 7 and 9 something. And, okay, another thing in this spot is that, like, if Broseph had a real hand that wasn't kings, I would expect him to typically, like, lead out 3 ways. So if he would lead out 3 ways, she's alright might lead out. So when it gets checked to me, there's actually quite a good chance that I just have the best hand and a lot of folding equity. But, like I said, 3 opponents, just too many. Too many for this, for me. I wouldn't hate a bet, but I suspect checking there was the best play. Here, on this hand that's coming up now, it seems like these games are going to run, so that's great. With the 9-10 Jack King, standard open, I think this one's going to kind of play itself. Once again, Soho Kid, if he calls the flop here, I would put him on a hand like Queen, Queen 5-7 maybe, or like a hand like Ace 10 Queen might call, or 4-5-6 style hands. I think all those sorts of hands would probably call. She's alright, just pots here. I suspect it seems very likely that he would have a hand like either Queen Queen 5-6, Queen Queen 5-7, or just 4-5-6. That would make a lot of sense to me. The problem is, I just, at best, I could call and then shove any turn that wasn't a straight card, but it's just not gonna. That would be how I played the hand. If I continued, I would call, and then because my equity changes on the turn, I would call, and then basically just be putting it in on any card that wasn't good for his range. Like I'd shove on a 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King. I'm not sure about a 6. Probably not. Anyway, yeah, so I just, he's not bluffing, he potted, he's probably got a combo draw of some description. So I think that's just a fine spot to fold. Here, she's alright, it's a loose player. Broseph, I seem to remember that he has fairly, like, positional statistics, which means he's opening the cutoff fairly wide. I mean, for his stats... Oh, he's pretty tight on the cutoff still. I mean, the bottom line is I'm re-raising this hand anyway, but I just wanted to kind of break it down if I had maybe a weaker hand, Here, I don't think it's necessary to bet more than, 147 here, especially having the flush draws covered. But even without the flush draws covered, I think this would be a fine bet size. Yeah, it just doesn't seem necessary to bet more than this, since no one's ever really going to call you. Yeah, and Hans Gussen, we still don't have any real information about him yet, so we'll just keep watching carefully. Trying to, just kind of get a feel for how he thinks about the game. Okay. Now, I'm just making sure that I don't run out of tables. But here on the top right table, kind of a speculative call, but most of the players in the pot seem like fairly weak players. And, well, I mean, it's not that speculative a call. I think I would always call there. Here against Soho Kid, a tough spot when we don't have a read of some description. Like, it would be a very easy spot if we, if we knew his small blind stat here, this would be trivial. I think I'm gonna 4-bet him anyway. Just, I feel like if a lot of people don't 3-bet here with bad aces, and so, it's just not that likely that he has a better hand than me. I also tend to play like reasonably loose from the button, sort of around 65%, which is probably too loose against good players. Now he shoves. 270 is actually about at the point where you can fold against, 270 to win a pot of 800. You only have 25% equity versus aces here. I'm just gonna call anyway. If I'm ever wrong, it's best to get it in. And also, if you beat the aces with the ace king king, he's gonna tilt harder than I am. Like so. Wow, I can't believe we won that. So really, that spot is like really dependent on how aggressively they play the small blind. If someone's re-raising you like over 10%, I suspect that that's a 4-bet. But any lower, you're kind of in dangerous territory there playing that way. Here, I've defended in the big blind, just basically a matter of pot odds like we've talked about in the past. I have a reasonable hand. I think this is a pretty good spot to donk the flop. I think it's very unlikely we get raised. And I think we're going to fold out a hand like ace-4-5, that sort of thing. Ace-4-5, even maybe jack-king or something like that, which would have us kind of have okay equity against us. Yeah. So, I mean, so far I've really been breaking down the sort of situations that have occurred at the table in this kind of like mathy way, We're talking about like, okay, well, what would Soho Kid's small blind re-raise have to be in order for us to 4-bet ace king king 4? I mean, that's basically a math problem. There's a little bit of logic to it in the sense that you can't give him all pairs of aces, like a lot of people wouldn't re-raise you with rainbow aces there pre-flop in the small blind. So I tend to think that his hand is more like ace-queen 10-y. We've got 2 kings, which kind of makes it a bit less likely he has ace big big small or something. But there's not really that many pairs of aces in his range there. He certainly wouldn't have aces 1 in 4 times, I mean, 2% of all hands or whatever is going to be aces, a little over that, and we've got an ace, so that's going to change things as well. So I mean, basically, I think that's a pretty clear 4-bet based on the math against a typical small blind re-raise. But if Soho Kid is very tight in the small blind, I think you should probably be calling. And the reason you would call there is twofold, right? One reason you would call is the math reason, like, well, he's playing tight, 4-betting ace king king 4 is just not going to be that good. That's really obvious. The other reason is that if he's re-raising you really tight, you can call, and then you're going to be able to take the whenever a small flop comes, you're now going to be able to win, because he's got a tight range, right? So if he's playing a tight range, he's going to have to check fold boards like 4-6-3 or 5-6-8. You're not really getting check raised there, so your ability to like steal the pot when checked to is a lot more profitable than than against a player who's splashier and re-raises with more speculative hands. So that's just kind of like, probably seems like a very straightforward spot pre-flop, but you can pretty much use any hand as a context to discuss these kind of concepts, I guess. I'm not really sure what happened before. Okay, so it's interesting because you got aces again here, and like in this spot that he's in, people kind of go both ways. Like he may call here or he may re-raise. That's like, it's really common to do both. What have I done? Okay, and Yeah, let's find out what he does. Bing. Wow, sorry, I'm like a monkey here. Monkey on the computer. Replay the hand. Okay, so I think he probably calls. Oh no, he re-raised. Okay, so he's aggressive with aces. I probably could have written that in a more efficient way, but okay, so like a lot of people in this spot call with the hand he actually has here, which is aces without a suited ace. I think it's pretty common. Yeah, it's just a common play to call there. I re-raise there a lot. I like playing pretty aggressively out of position, but it's good to know. That's definitely something I would take notice of. I mean, I took a note, you know. It's also interesting that he checked the flop after re-raising pre-flop. He's also got the 10 blocker. I would have just bet that flop. That flop's really good for his re-raising range from the big blind. Like, you know, he's just going to win that pot a ton of the time against a hand that has, you know, up to 50% equity against him. Something like, you know, Queen 7-8, sorry, Queen 7-8 or Jack 7-8. They're going to fold to the flop bet probably. I mean, I think that's the right play. So he can get the other player off a pretty good hand. You know, even 7-7-4-5 here, right? Like, he's probably got the 7-7-4-5 hand here. Probably had you know, probably had like 12% equity or something, and he got to see that on the river. So I mean, even when they have absolutely no outs at all, you're saving yourself. You know, that's $10 out of the pot or whatever. 10% of the pot goes to Juanito. So even when they have no equity, he would have prevented himself from possibly losing a pot there. Here with kings in the button, Juanito, we still don't have a great read on him, but if he's opening 100% buttons so far, I think this is a, like, we can only go off the information we have so far, and someone opening 100%, someone stealing 100% buttons, you know, this is, the play is to re-raise. Here you can kind of go between betting and checking here. I tend to just bet. Like, I tend to... Same with this ace-ace 10-4 situation, you know, like, I can see why he checked, but you're really just putting yourself in tricky situations. You're also denying yourself value against hands that, like, will call you that have less equity than your hand, you know? Like, in this situation, Queen-King, or Jack-King, or 9-King, all these hands aren't a favorite against you, but they're gonna call. And they also might bluff you off the best hand if you check. So, I don't know, I would have bet that hand. But a reasonable check, not terrible or anything. Here, Juanito opens again, playing fairly aggressively. He also pots under the gun. So, just little things to notice. Here in this hand, I'm just going to mention why I bet there again as well. There's the, like... Okay, I'll mention why I re-raised as well. When someone's opening 100% of the button... 100% buttons, and you re-raise with a hand like King, King, 4-7. Like, obviously this isn't a great hand, but, you know, your straight-up equity against their range is good. Like, that's a math thing. Then, there's really not too many ways for them to counter the re-raise if they're opening 100%. Like, what are they gonna do? Either they're gonna fold with, like, maybe their bottom 60%, right? That seems reasonable. Like, they call 40% of their hands and fold the other 60%. But okay, now my re-raise looks great. You know, he's folding 2 out of 3 times almost. Or he calls every time, which is like pretty common for people that open 100% buttons. Like, I kind of do this myself. And then if he's calling all the time, you know, if he's calling with 75% of his hands, like, he's just going to have to fold this flop with the vast majority of his range. Like, so frequently he's going to have a hand like ace 3-4 jack on this board, right? Well, now what's he going to do? that's a good flop for him if he's got ace 3 4 jack, you know. So what's he planning to do there? So there's the combination of my hand just having plenty of equity, and then just also considering why, like how the hand's going to play out. Probably he's going to call. I'm going to c-bet the flop, and he's just going to fold. You know, it's not really too rocket sciencey there. Once you start to develop more of a dynamic in that situation, those spots get a bit trickier. Like the difference between 100% button open and like 70 is pretty significant. Here, you know, a hand kind of looks pretty. I would probably play it if the 7 was a 9. I don't really think it's a good hand, really. But double suited, semi-connected. So Soho Kid, so far we kind of have started to develop this read that he's reasonably aggressive. Juanito's also reasonably aggressive. Pre-flop anyway. Well, not pre-flop, but he kind of steals a lot. He's pretty active. We haven't really had an opportunity to see how he plays post-flop. Okay, Soho Kid's just playing like really loose. So Soho Kid's like playing pretty lag. I don't know how he plays post-flop, so I can't decide what, you know, what label to give him. I'm just gonna give him the blue loose label. It's typically what the Euros get. Anyway, he's playing very active. So I've stressed this in past videos, but you know, I've only got 33 hands here. If you're only looking at stats, that seems like an insignificant amount of hands, right? But like, how like Phil Ivey would see the hand is he would just be like, oh, I saw you call in the small blind with ace 4 5 2 rainbow, and then he would just know your VPIP in every position from that point. You know what I mean? So I guess what I'm saying is that like the amount of information that you can glean from just paying attention, like vastly, it's just way more than you can get any other way. Like that's just never going to show up in a statistic. Like he's playing 47%, but to call that hand in small blind is very telling about what he can, like how he's playing poker. He probably likes to play heads up pots as well. That's why he called with a hand that's very weak when he was in the small blind. He gets to play this heads up pot. Here on the right, I think I probably have the best hand at this point. I put him on a hand like either 9-10 of spades, or like, you know, he could have something like Jack 8. Jack 8 would be pretty reasonable as well, or like Jack, you know, whatever. I'm just going to bet something small on the river. He doesn't seem like a great player. I could also not have the best hand here, but I'm just going to bet 77. I think that's the right size. I can see him just kind of paying that off with plenty of worse hands. Maybe I could have gone 87 there because he called a little too fast, but he probably had a, well, we'll find out. Okay, so he checked aces in this situation. Check, call, aces in SB, VBB on 7-9 J. Okay, so, you know, he just goes to the straight up green tag. So I'm just gonna so I guess what I was stressing more in terms of getting into players' heads and the sort of methodology to do that is using these little pieces of information. And I'm not professing to be able to make some incredible read on someone based on seeing them call ace 4 5 2, but even the process of me trying to decide how much information I can actually gain from how this hand was played, like if I sat here with this one hand for an hour, I would probably be able to get like quite a lot of information about the player from it. You know, because he checks here, he checked the flop. Okay, so I mean, he played loose against an under the gun open because it would be heads up. Then he didn't stab on the turn. That's good to know. and then he just checked it down. On the other hand, M Darkus, KB King on JJ6. He's we don't really have a read on him yet. I think he's a multi-tabling regular as well. His check with kings here is fine. I think a lot of people bet there though, and I would normally bet there. I think, or maybe mix it up between betting and checking. Like I'd bet there maybe 70-80% of the time. Just because I like to get value from my hands. I think queens are going to call you. It's pretty unlikely that you're beat. You can get a flush draw to either fold or, the one issue is if someone's very check raise heavy, you're going to get check raised, which would suck. But that's the price you pay. Anyway, that hand was kind of interesting to see. Soho Kid's just continuing to play like fairly active, min raising the cutoff. That's interesting to note. Like he's got multiple raise sizes. And I haven't really talked about this guy Blue Fleck who's sat down up until this point. I don't think we've really seen any hands from him. Yeah, I don't think he's shown anything down. But we're, like I've mentioned again and again and again, like if someone sits down, especially if they've got 200 BB, you should be, like the second a hand is revealed that they play, you should be able to like get as much information as possible from that. Whether that be, just that they maybe play kind of loose or whatever. Here I've seen Juanito isolating like fairly frequently. So I think his range here is actually kind of wide. I'm pretty tempted to repop him here. I think his isolating range is fairly wide, but I don't think the jacks are quite good enough here. If I had ace queen queen, I don't think that matters too much. I'd probably re-raise that one though. I think maybe I could re-raise there anyway. I certainly would have re-jacked up with kings, just because you're basically going to get it all in on the flop. I mean, this hand is very similar. I don't know. I think I could have re-raised there. It may be exaggerating the, maybe taking a read too far to do that. Like, I've noticed that he's kind of isolating once or twice. You don't want to jump on that too much, you want to use that to get information, but you don't want to go crazy with your two hands of info, Still, the way this hand's played out, I mean, I'm not going to win this pot. I imagine I'd be very surprised if I did. But by the way, I did consider betting the turn there, and then betting probably every river. But I don't think that play has enough value. I think someone has a 9 fairly frequently, and they're obviously never going to fold that. Wow, interesting. Okay, so once again, like he limped ace king 6-4, limp call, which it's not terrible. It's definitely not a good play, but it's not really losing much money. Yeah, Andy K also overlimped, which I wouldn't really have expected him to do, since he's playing all the tables and he's deep at all of them. Not that there's anything wrong with overlimping a hand, that's totally fine. Here. Yeah, okay, he overlimped, KJH, J2. I think the overlimp with that specific hand is probably the best play. Like, limping with jacks, it's pretty reasonable. I might have isolated now, knowing Soho Kid is kind of a loose caller, loose limp caller, and it would be, like, getting it heads up with the king, jack, jack 2 there is fine. It also, even if someone calls behind you, you're going to probably be able to bet 3-way on a lot of board textures and take it down. Here it just got checked down. Everyone played pretty passively. Andy K didn't stab. It's interesting that Juanito didn't c-bet with the Queen 10 of spades here on this board texture. I think he probably should be betting there. Seems very unlikely that he gets check raised, especially at the stack depth, and well, I mean, I think what that kind of shows is, like, to not c-bet there shows that he's not thinking about hand ranges the same way I personally would be. Because I would look at that board and say, like, well, queens, kings, ace, king, 10, ace, x suited, none of those hands can call me. He's kind of thinking, oh, this board is really connected, I shouldn't c-bet. But, like, it's not connected in the sense that it's connected with the hands people play. Like, that's a board that someone will have the nuts on way more than most boards. Like, someone will have 9-10 very frequently. As far as, you know, very frequently, meaning, like, maybe 1 in 5 times or something. Not that much, but... well, one of them might have it that frequently. But he's got a 10 as well. I don't really rate his check there. I think that's pretty weak. If you also imagine the way that the hand plays out, like if a deuce comes on the turn and someone bets out, you know, like, he's not going to be able to call. He's not going to be able to call with a queen high flush draw. So I mean, he could make it so that he could guarantee that he realizes his equity by betting the flop there and then checking the turn, or maybe even bluffing the turn. So just an interesting spot. But he also isolated pretty wide there. You know, his isolating is fine. That's good, probably. Good and aggressive. You know, like, a lot of the time, one of the limpers will fold and he'll get it heads up with a limper. In that situation, his hands, you know, that's going to be great. He can play heads up with that position against what's likely a weak hand. Here, this looks like a kind of crazy call, but he's basically min-raised, and the pot odds are just, in my mind, they're just too appealing. Yeah. I'm kind of a sucker for the pot odds, though, so proceed with caution. Here on this flop, you know, I'm going to check raise. My check raising range here is pretty wide. I'd probably be check raising any flush draw. And you know, I don't think Juanito can fold a lot of, like, legitimate hands in this situation, and I just want to get value, essentially. If the diamond comes, it's actually fairly interesting, because I think if he calls, a reasonable amount of his range is going to have diamonds. That's probably that's like one of the worst cards in the deck. I might still bet. I think I this is a tough spot on the turn. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to check. And the reasoning behind my check... Okay, either he already has a boat, in which case, obviously, I want to check. Or he's got a flush draw. In that case, you know, he's not very likely to hit the flush draw, and I can also have him dominated. Here, really all I'm worried about now is ace-10, obviously. I think I'm just going to check and then call, I think. That way I induce a bluff from a flush draw, like, you know, king 10 of diamonds, or king 8 of diamonds, more specifically. But, interesting that he didn't value bet there. No thin value bet in tricky spots. I don't mind his check there. That note probably doesn't mean what it actually says, but I in my experience, that, you know, spots like this, if he bets, it's not very, like, it's not a great spot for him to bet. He's going to be really tempted to, like, bet, and then if he gets, he's, like, scared of getting check raised, essentially, which I could definitely check raise him. He's scared of getting check raised, and he also doesn't think he's going to get value from worse frequently at all. Both of those are totally reasonable assumptions. You know, checking's probably fine, slash the best play probably, but it just kind of shows that in these kind of spots, rather than going for razor thin value, or possibly even bad value, which, you know, people do fairly commonly, he's just going to check it down, which is that's gonna make us think about polarized situations later. You know, like if he bet this river, we'd be like, he either has 8-9 of diamonds or he has ace-10. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather at the moment. Blue fleck we're still trying to get a read on, but he's playing pretty snug so far. Here, how's this going down? M Darkest raises, Soho Kid calls, Andy Kid squeezes. Okay. And how much did he bet on the flop here? Why did it not say the flop bet? That's weird. Okay, well, he squeezes. Andy K bet 99 into 160 or whatever. Okay, so not much we can glean from this one, except maybe Andy K didn't have aces there. A lot of people have very ace-heavy squeeze ranges. The reason I'd say maybe slash probably didn't have aces is we had ace-6. So, okay, so then the next thing we can start thinking about is, like, he bet 99 into 180. You know, there's nothing we can really tell from that because we don't know what he had. But we had the ace-6. Maybe in the future we'll be able to use that information to get something. You know, what I'm basically thinking is, if he bets 99 there, and then bets 120 later, that may, I'm not gonna make that make some massive read based on that, but that may provide more information. Like, that might not be his standard bet size with his 100% of his hands. So I keep talking about this, but when I'm making these kind of like small micro kind of reads, I'm not necessarily, you know, I'm not going to necessarily use them or whatever to make some crazy play. I'm just kind of doing it in the same way that you might take notes in class but never read them later. You know, like, you're still learning through the process of writing the notes. Here on the right table, I bet the turn because I thought that it was unlikely that he had 7-8, especially when I had an 8, and I thought a hand like Queen Queen 10 would give me, like, Queen Queen 10 with clubs, or Queen Queen Jack with clubs, or Kings with clubs, or Ace X of clubs, something like that would give me value. Here on the turn, like, we could have the best hand here, but we've got too much behind, and he's potted us. I just don't think that it's going to play out too well against his range. If you set his range of hands as being like 7-8 or the occasional semi-bluff, it's just not going to pan out too well. Anyway, we're getting up to the 45-minute point here, so I'm going to play out a few more hands, and then just kind of do a little session recap towards the end, using the hand history viewer for maybe 5 minutes or so. Fold. Okay, I'm just gonna call this hand in the big blind. It's probably a losing call in terms of pre-flop equity or whatever. It's not really good enough, but it's close, and you know, these are lower than the normal stakes I play, so I have a higher skill equity edge post flop. Like, you know, the bigger you're, like, every decision I make compared to their decisions, I'm gonna be making more EV than I would. Than I should be able to. Here I'm just going to check raise the flop. I don't really think there's a lot of hands that can call me. There's 3 good cards on the turn, like a king, queen, or 9. I'm going to keep betting on this one as well. This is a fairly high variance play, but you know, I feel okay about it. Basically, like, I'm putting him to decision on the turn here for all the money, and he shoved. That's fine. I think probably he has queen 10. Yeah. The reason I bet the turn, by the way, I probably could have bet 87 there. I bet $10 too much. The reason I bet the turn was because I figured that a hand like aces or 4-5-6 would fold. Also a hand like ace, queen, jack, or something like that might fold. I'm not sure. Here in the small blind with this hand, it's still a compulsory re-raise. I'm not really sure how Juanito, like, if he's going to automatically stab this board, but this isn't exactly a great board for my range in terms of c-betting, so I occasionally check raise this spot. The turn, I think I have to bet now. Uh, I'll get value from spades. I'm not really too worried about anything. I probably should have bet 87 there. Once again, these 87s. But no auto stab on 256. No auto stab 25d6. That one's like a really important read to have in re-raised pot. That kind of read like lets you decide, you know, if he checks back the flop, like, does that mean he has a piece? You know what I mean? Like, most people would stab that board just if they had air. So, and like a lot of people just bet at 100%. Like if you checked them, they'll bet queens there, you know. So it's pretty interesting to try to work out what kind of range that actually represents. Yeah, actually, what I'll do is, well, I'm actually gonna finish the session right now, but maybe we can look at one or two hands before it's all over. I don't actually think too many big hands went down this session, but we can have a look at a couple. Oh, we didn't even see this one go down. So as you know, even when you're like really paying attention, you can miss this kind of stuff. Oh, I think this was probably okay. Yeah. Okay, so like looks like a pretty straightforward hand. Broseph re-raises out of the big blind with Jack 10 8 9. That's fine. Even with the 3 spades, I think that's pretty normal. I don't think it's compulsory. Like, I think you could make a pretty strong argument that you just never re-raise to the big blind against under the gun +1. But I would re-raise the hand. Juanito 4 bets. Obviously, Broseph has to call. Now the flop, he's just going to shove. Very straightforward hand. So nothing really too interesting there. This other hand Broseph was involved in, he opened. This is where we were talking about maybe playing the big blind here. But I didn't really think that we could have any. We had enough folding equity post flop, and the hand just wasn't quite good enough equity wise to justify playing it pre-flop. Here he c-bets, fairly small on this kind of polarized board texture. That's a reasonable play. I would probably be betting a bit larger here regardless, just because I don't, like if you're looking at this hand and having a balanced range in this spot, you know, the stacks are too deep for me to be like wanting to. I don't know, like that bet size is okay, but I would tend to be betting more, like just charging people to draw and just kind of think the hand plays out better, I guess. Here he bets 52 on the turn, also a small bet, so kind of interesting to see what he has here at the end of this hand, because I would bet like 70 here with my whole range, especially since she's alright, just can't ship, you know. Not with my whole range as in, I would bet 100% of the time. If you look at the range of hands people have in this kind of situation, yeah, I wouldn't be betting 100% of the time. I don't think you have 50% folding equity there. Anyway, with your air, and then it gets cold, and he bets 122 and it goes down. Okay, so like this is actually kind of an interesting hand. She's alright for starters, like we noticed, was playing very loose. This hand, like if you again and again, like repetition is the key to learning something, but like if you saw this one hand, right, you see someone ace 3 6 4, you're immediately going to have some insight into how this person is playing poker. You know, like a few choices were made when she's alright called there. Like A, she wanted to play the hand, or he wanted to play the hand, which is loose. B, didn't re-raise the hand, totally fine. So we know kind of like a loose passive call. Then floats the flop. That's really isn't another play. Although with Broseff's small bet size, maybe you could raise. I wouldn't do that, but that seems good. It's interesting that Broseff made the kind of small bet just to kind of move the hand along for a cheap price. On the turn, same deal. So actually, it's quite funny. Maybe here Broseff was doing more of an exploitive play, like because he doesn't have, he's not really worried about defending his hand. He's like literally saying like, I have this type of hand. I'm betting medium because I have a medium strength hand, and I want to get showdown. Like I want to defend my, I want to protect my hand against 8-9 of spades, but you know, and I don't want to check call. It's funny, a lot of people I think in Broseph seat would check call with the queens there, and I think that's like far worse than just betting. That's kind of a no limit situation. Like in no limit, it really looks like the turn would be a check with this type of hand, but the way PLO plays out, you're just way better off betting. Yeah, it doesn't even seem close at all to me. You've got some folding equity versus ace queen 10 if you bet. Like, that hand's not always going to fold, but it definitely is sometimes. King 10 of spades might fold. I would have bet more than Broseph. I think you have significantly more folding equity if you bet like 70 instead of 80. 70 instead of, sorry, like 50. And then on the river, also another decision. You know, on the river here, I kind of like a check in Broseph spot, which is interesting. I think maybe that's just because playing with tougher players, you're probably just going to check everything when you're in Broseph's seat. Because she's alright, it's very likely that she's alright either has spades or picked up a club draw on the turn. And against either of those hands, like if she's alright has queens with spades, she's probably going to bluff the river on the club, and if he has clubs, well, you want to check call, you know? And I don't think that she's alright would check like any clubs behind. But against a weaker player, betting is probably best. Anyway, he calls, which, I don't know, getting a reasonable price, I guess that's okay. Also called on the turn. I probably would have raised when he bet 50, maybe not. I don't know, just kind of like interesting hand to kind of get into the kind of exploitive versus optimal plays. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. I've kind of got a cold at the moment, so talking for an hour is, you know, that's kind of done me in. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. One thing we're kind of talking about at Deuces is what the preferred format for some videos are. We talked about this a bit in the last series, and it seemed like most of the responses were like okay with this kind of stream of consciousness narration of videos, but I'm happy to kind of, what we'll probably do is start to mix a few with a bit more of hand review kind of stuff in, and a few like this as the series goes on. If you do have an opinion on this, feel very free to comment in the posts. I mean, the videos are being made to educate you in like the best way that I essentially can. So, you know, let me know what you would actually like. I like doing it this way, but you know, you guys are the customers, and I would love to make you happy. So until next time, this was, well, I was about to say this was Cooking with Cowpeg, because that's a me and Cowpeg are messing around with a cooking show. But this was Crossfire, not Cooking with Cowpeg. You will not be seeing any bacon in this series. Well, maybe we'll put some bacon in next week, but we'll see. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next week. Ciao.